Okay, I have Siyan Li in the booth with me today. She is a management consultant at Boston Consulting Group, a talk show investigator, and a best-selling author of the book How to Become Funny in 14 Days. So, before I get to my first question, I guess what I want to ask is there anything else you want to add to your title there? Is there a way is can you introduce yourself better than I just did?
Thank you, Ted. You are very kind. I don't have anything else I would add, but to simplify the information a little bit better for audience, I usually just introduce myself as a management consultant by day and a Hollywood investigator by night.
Mm.
Yeah, hopefully that's some simpler. Hopefully.
Okay, all right. Well then, yeah, let's just hop right into the first question here. So, your passion, your nighttime passion, apart from your job, really seems to be like you've made a niche out of identifying social psychological factors that you've learned from talk shows or the entertainment industry, and then teaching others how those same factors could be applied to real life situations. So, um, really, I guess what my question here is, what do you think are the most useful skills that you've learned in your studying of that?
Um, I think two things perhaps. One is definitely you can learn to be funnier. I started this project because I was obsessed with funny people. I didn't think I was funny. I still don't think I'm that funny. But after doing all this analysis, I definitely become funnier. I got like I feel like I have better conversations with people, with friends, strangers, or colleagues, and I definitely benefit hugely from this process. So the conclusion is no matter your level of funniness is today, you can definitely learn and become funnier if you want to. I mean, in fact, a lot of stand-up comedians, they they weren't born to be funny. They also crafted their speeches multiple times before they can come up with something that's really hilarious. There's a lot of hard work behind the scenes.
Mm,
So, I mean, you don't need to be a stand-up comedian. Neither did I want to, but the point is you can definitely learn to be funnier if you want to. And the second thing is there is a big difference between being a stand-up comedian versus just being a little bit funnier and wittier in daily life. I was interested in the latter and not the former. And when I started, there were books for people who want to be stand-up comedians, and if this is what your audience is interested in, I mean, go ahead and read those books. Um, However, for people who actually want to be a little funnier and wittier in daily conversations with friends, strangers, and colleagues, I didn't see a lot of resources. Hence, I did my own research. And
mm,
then it's not as complicated as most people would think. So, for example, as I wrote in my article, there are a few ways that are extremely easy to use to be immediately funny. So, one example would be given the opposite answer to yes or no questions. Jennifer Lawrence uses that a lot. Um, so, whenever people expect you to say yes, you say no, and vice versa. I use
mm.
it a lot, for example, at work as well. When people ask me, hey, can you give me, can you give me 5 minutes or can we do this like 30 minutes later? And almost everyone asking me that question would expect me to say yes. They're just being polite by asking, but so they would expect me to say yes. So a lot of times I would say no, and
Yeah,
then I would ask,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay. So that was just one simple example for how you can use a simple tactic like that, and it's incredibly powerful because all you have to do is just to respond in opposite fashion to yes and no questions.
Mm,
So So there are a couple other tactics in my article, but I mean, becoming funnier in daily conversation is probably easier than you think.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. Not that I'm an expert in the field, but I mean, if your book can make me funny in 14 days, well, then I think it could do that for anybody, because I've been trying that for 30 years, and I'm not that funny yet. So, I guess my next question here really is, what else here? So other than giving opposite questions, right? I think what from what I understand, a lot of humor and comedy is based on surprise. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. So yeah, so is there any other simple tricks, or is that the simplest, most easily applicable one?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because before I did all this research, when I Googled how to be funny, one of the big things that I saw from WikiHow is be surprising. However, what I didn't get from WikiHow was how exactly to be surprising. What can you do? What can you say to be surprising? That was the big question I had. So after all this analysis, I would say there are definitely a few specific ways you can create that surprise. One example I would give you is use numbers. So numbers are great when it comes to creating surprises because if something is really big, usually numbers would tell. And if something is very small, numbers would also tell. So all you have to do to create surprises is setting up the expectation going one way and then drop the number that indicates otherwise. That's how you
Okay.
artificially create surprises and be surprising. So to give you a few examples, I remember, for if you ask, I remember one YouTuber or like online marketer used to say this, and then he would say, when I started, I had a massive email list of 6 people. So he used a massive first to sort of indicate that, wow, this is going to be big. And then he dropped the number 6, which is tiny. So that's how he got a laugh with the tactic, which is being opposite with numbers. Another example would be, and this is what I use for my life as well, is people at work often ask me, how long have you been with the firm? And there are many people who've been with the firm for 5, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years. And my response to that question a lot of times would be, this is when I just joined the firm. So I would say something like, I've been with the firm for a very long time, 2 months. And then
Okay.
they will laugh. They would
Yeah.
most likely as well. So it's very simple. You just have to build up expectation
Hmm.
going one way and then use the number to just overturn that expectation. And then you can add, words like only. And I mean, you use only when you're gonna say a big number, right? And you use words like massive, long, huge when you drop a small number. So it's all those are just some of the ways that you can set the expectation and be surprising with the numbers.
Mm. Okay. So it really just sounds like you're really trying to boil comedy and humor down to a formula. Is that something like that?
I try. I really want people to have the tactics that they know exactly what they're gonna do with them.
Mm.
And this is, I mean, partly is because when I was looking for tactics, and there weren't much that was practical and actionable.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if it's a formula um, that people find useful and applicable, great. But I think at the core of it is I want people to know what exactly to do with this tactic and it must be easy and fast when they want to
Mm,
apply it. It's not like you have to take 3 months of improv class before you can be a little bit funnier. Most people think that way, but not everybody has time or interest for improv class. And I have proven to people that you don't have to. And
hmm.
of course, like those tactics is not going to make you the next David Letterman, um, but that's not the purpose. So the purpose of those tactics is to improve your humor level from, for example, 5%. If David Letterman
To
is
10 million%.
is 100%, right? Then maybe we can improve you from 5% to 30%.
Yeah,
And I think that's good enough, or maybe to 50%. Because with a few simple tactics, you can be funnier than the average people. And to
absolutely.
me, I think that's that's a very good ROI because the effort you put in is not much.
No, I can't tell you how much you know, I feel like we really had that same thought process in common because I think I went through the same phase, you know, psychologically speaking, what is it that makes you funnier? And I started getting all these books and reading all these ideas, and I'm like, I've never felt less funny than trying to read about how to be funny. So like, you know, I'm going through the list of advice for this seems to be endless, you know, and you know, I like what you did with your book because you know, I'm all about that idea of taking something that seems like it would a skill that seems like it would take a very long time to really you know, train and boil down and get, and instead finding a simpler exercises that you can give people because like you said, not everybody's trying to be the next Letterman, you know. I think most people would be happy to be 10% funnier than they are, you know. And I think your book is really the only one I've found that has that kind of approach to it.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah,
That's really great to hear. Thank you, Ted.
yeah, no problem. So I do want to talk a little bit about your other work here. You know, that kind of segues from that first question. So I first stumbled upon your work at the Science of People website, and you know, I thought what people like you and Vanessa Van Edwards and your other colleagues there were doing is really interesting because you guys just do such an efficient job of, you know, applying the psychology that you're teaching other people in a way that they can understand. So I guess, you know, my next thoughts are, is there any way you think about teaching other people the skills that you have? The is there any kind of tricks you think of? You know, I want them to understand this, I want them to be able to do this, sort of like you're describing with your book, you know, make it simpler and boil it down to something they can do right away. Is that confusing? Did I just ask you a ridiculously confusing question?
No, I think I understand what you are asking. But let me play back to you to make sure I got you right.
Sure.
So it sounds like you were asking about how Science of People platform has been efficient or um has been doing a good job in terms of spreading the knowledge about psychology, productivity, and things like that. Um, but also like sort of it sounds like the audience are liking the content, and it sounds like the audience know what to do with the content. It's not like
Mm,
another blog post on a web.
yep.
So I think what you're asking is how did Science of People identify that approach and then produce the kind of content that audience is liking? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that is pretty close. I guess a really simple way of asking it would be, what kind of strategies do you guys use to teach what you're teaching? Are there any, or do you just kind of?
Yeah, okay. So Um, really, this question would be much better answered by Vanessa because she's a founder of Science of People, and I don't work for Science of People. I more like partner with them because I feel like there's certain overlap between her content and my content.
Mm,
So I don't want to speak for Science of People or Vanessa, but I think I would say one thing our article strives to be is that it gives you very actionable advice. Again, this is one reason that my How to Be Funny stuff got to be published on Science of People because we essentially have very similar philosophy. We all want to give readers very specific tactic and action steps. So
mm,
I think Vanessa was one of the pioneers to do that. And when most of the blog posts are just like, oh, one, do this, but then two, do this, but they're like list of goals, but still you don't really know what to do with them.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I asked that question because of that. I was reading, in her book, she does a really great job of, writing exercises or bullet points that make the skill she's trying to teach you directly actionable and simple enough for you to pick up and not get confused with. So I guess that would probably be a better question for her then.
Yeah.
Okay. So um okay. All right, so I'll wrap this up with my last question here. A lot of what I've seen in your work seems to be based on interview skills here, right? And so, you know, really, I think what you're learning in a lot of interview skills are a lot of basic conversation skills, right? And that's how you think of it. So, is there one or two basic, skills or ideas that you would say people should focus on for that? Or
Well, you mean communication skills?
yeah.
Mm, where do I start? I think it's very hard to say one or two things to focus on um, because if I do that, I will become the other blog post, which is like give you one thing, but you still don't know what to do with it. But if I really had to do that, I think it depends a lot on the scenarios you are applying. I mean, I have two worlds. One is my casual life with friends. The other world is my work. And when it comes to my work environment, we do a lot of communication, but then the kind of the communication principle that are emphasized heavily are things like you want to be very clear, concise, and also use numbers a lot. So, for example, before you jump into any specific details, I'm going to say something like, I have three things to tell you today. Or to make the best use of our 15 minutes here, I have two questions or I have two agenda items I want to cover. One is what? Two is what? Do you agree? Before I jump into any kind of detail.
Mm,
I mean, the world of consulting, communication is always top down. And the
mm,
reason for that is because one, we have very busy schedule. So sometimes your manager has like 5 minutes to talk to you, and then she wants to know exactly what's blocking you. And if you have three things and she only has time for one, and she wants to make sure this is the most important one she's addressing.
mm,
So in my world of work, then communication comes down to being concise, prioritization, and definitely top-down communication.
mm,
Whereas in life, when things are casual, then I would say it's very different. Like you don't, you don't talk to people and say, "Hey, I have three things I want to cover today," and the afternoon, right? And when
Yeah,
you have afternoon tea with your friends, you don't
yeah,
talk like that. So maybe I'll have this is where I have to be cliche and say it is important to listen carefully. Um,
absolutely, yeah.
and a lot of times, I mean, in terms of tactics, because we always want to be like specific and always want to give specific tactics to people, right? So I think one tactic I would say for listen carefully is that try to play back what people have said. So even if it's a casual conversation with friends, but when you play back to them instead of just jumping in with your own points, you can
Hmm.
make them feel they're heard, which is very important.
Absolutely.
And the second, you get more information that way. So there's
Mm,
a book called Never Split the Difference, and it's a negotiation book for how you can negotiate with terrorists and also with a lot of business owners. And one of the key tactics there is just repeat the last three words that the other person have just said to you.
mm,
And it's a tactic to get more information out of that instead of asking, why do you say that? Why? Like, or what does that make? Why does that matter? Things like that. You just ask, you just repeat the last three words you said. And psychologically, when you do that, the other person will feel compelled, or I don't know what psychological or biological wiring there is, but the other person will feel like they have to share more information with you. So whatever your purpose is, um, playing back to them, repeating last three words is always a good tactic when you want to show that you are listening or when you want to get more information or just keep the conversation going.
yeah, yeah. I think that is perfectly in line with everything I've learned about good conversation skills from the psychology research. So I think, anybody who would be listening to this, it really is as simple as being a good listener. And if you can do that, the other person seems to be able to tell. And um, I hope I've done that for you today. We didn't have much to talk, but I tried to, make you feel understood as well as I could. So
Yeah, you're doing a great job. I mean,
thank you.
this is great talk.
I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.